everybody, today we're going to talk about how to pick up for multiple squares at once so that you only have to have two ends for your black going all the way across instead of two for each square. So in order to do this, you will need your blanket. You're going to need to have a lot of it done, and you're going to need to have one flat section at the top that's all even. So this stuff I've already done, and as you can see, I don't weave in the ends until I've picked up from them. So this is all done. This is all at the same level. See how these are all in the same row, these squares that I'm going to pick up? Those are the ones that I'm going to pick up, and I'm going to pick up all the way across until here, where it goes off at another level again. So in order to do this, all of your squares have to be at the same level. If you think ahead, then you can just constantly keep your blanket at the same level once you get all your base squares done. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. What you'll need is your blanket, a long stretch of squares at the same level on the blanket. You'll also need your contrast yarn for picking up. You will need your working needles, and you will need a really long pair of the correct size needles with a really long circular cable. I highly recommend using interchangeable needles for this. This is what I use, and if you're doing a really big blanket, then you can just add extra cables. That way you don't have like one useless pair of insanely long needles. However, if you want to get a dedicated pair of needles, you go right ahead. And the other supply that you are going to need is some stitch markers. If you don't have stitch markers, you can use paper clips, you can use safety pins, you can use tiny pieces of yarn tied in knots, you can use rubber bands, anything you want, but you are definitely going to want something to mark your stitches right now, because there's going to be a lot of stitches and you're going to need to count, and you just don't want to be going back and recounting over and over again. So for this technique, you're going to start on looking at the right side of your blanket, and you're going to start on the far right side of your level section. In my case, that's right here. If you work ahead, that might be the very edge of your blanket. You are going to take your very long needles and your contrast yarn, and you're going to pick up right here just the way you normally would for any body square. So we'll pick up, in my case, 24, one central stitch, and then 24. I will see you again in a moment. Okay, so now I have picked up just right here, just like I normally would for a body square. If you don't know how to do that, please refer back to my body squares video. I will put the number that it is in the down bar, because I think it's the second video, but I'll put it as a caption. But you're just going to pick up here just like you would for a regular body square. Now, I've added markers here. A lot of you might just not use markers. I don't use stitch markers anymore when I pick up or do the normal square, right? Because I can follow it. I know what I'm doing. I've done almost 200 of these. But I highly, highly, highly recommend that you use stitch markers for this. Because you're going to be dealing with a lot of things and you just do not want to have to recount constantly every time you let go. So you're going to pick up for this square just like you normally would, except normally if you were making a body square, you would then turn around and go backward. Instead, you're going to take a marker, put it on your needle, and then move straight on to the next square. And you're going to pick this one up exactly the same way. So 24, 1, 24. And then you'll put another marker, go to the next square, all the way across. So you're doing the front side of every single square as you go. Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how I pick up this next square. So after you've put your marker on, the key is to look at the top of the square, and you see how you have like this top thing that ends up. You want to fold that in the back. I like to pinch it down with my fingers and stick your needle in the place where you would normally pick up your first stitch going down the body square, but make sure you're keeping the yarn tail in your back. And then take your working yarn and kind of just go, let's see if this is focusing. Yeah, just kind of go over the top of that square when you pick that next stitch up, okay? Then you continue down the side just like you normally would, but I'm going to show you what I mean. Here, you can see that the contrast yarn is on top of the tippy top of the square below it. So that's how you want to go over the edges here. So I'm going to go ahead, finish up this square, and I will be doing the same thing all the way across, and I will see you then. So here I am. I've now picked up for 2 squares. One here with markers, marker in between, yarn going across the top, and then one here with markers. And I'm going to do that 1, 2, 3, 4 more times, and then it stops being even. So I am just going to go ahead and do those 4, and I will see you when I turn around. Alright, so I've finished this whole row now. So this is where I've started, and you can see as you go across that I have the tips of the row sort of underneath at the edge of every one. So I go all the way across to here. And at this point, you can see that it stops being even. This one is up another level, and so I can't go any farther. So I've gone all the way across. I've picked up and knit like I would during the regular process, and I'm going to turn this around. Sorry about my needles scraping on my desk. I don't really know what else to do about that. And what I'm going to do is take the other end of my long needle. This is why it needs to be really long, because it's going to go across as much of the blanket as you have flat. Going to adjust my stitches so that they're all back on my needle, so I'm ready to knit back in the opposite direction. Now, if you are someone who doesn't normally use the stitch markers, you can take out the stitch markers that mark the center stitch of each square. However, I strongly recommend keeping the ones between each square. Trust me, it'll just make your life so much easier in the long run. I'm going to start this off just like I would the second row of a normal body square. Slip purlwise with yarn in front, move the yarn to the back, and knit all the way across. And you might remember on a normal body square, this row, this contrast row, you knit all the way across. So I'm going to do that. Okay, so I'm now getting to the point where I'm approaching the marker in between the squares. So what I'm going to do is knit right up to that marker, slip the marker, move my yarn to the front, and slip one stitch purlwise, and then bring my yarn to the back again and keep knitting. Okay, I'm going to finish this square and I will show you again on the next square. Okay, so now I've knit down this side here, skipped the whole center section, just knit right through it, and I'm back up here. I'm at the next marker between the 2 squares. So again, you're going to knit straight up to the marker, and then slip the marker, move the yarn to the front, and slip the next stitch purlwise, move the yarn to the back, and knit all the way across. So I will now knit across to my next square divider, do the same thing here, same thing here, and then I'll get to the end and I'll be done. I'm going to do that and I'll come back in a moment. Okay, so I have just knit all the way across here, slipping the stitches as I showed you at each marker between the squares, and I'm just about at the end, and you're just going to end this just like you normally end the first part of a body square. So go right up to the last stitch. In the last stitch, you will knit through the back loop. Alright, I'm going to turn this around now. So every place you go between the square where you're picking up across, you should have one strand of yarn right there, right over the very tip of that square, from when you went over on the right side. And then, and it's really hard to see right now, but there is a second strand from when you came back. So every single time you go over the tip of a square, you're going to have 2 strands there. And by the way, I just realized that you could hear my cat water fountain in the background, so I turned that off for the duration of my recording. So it looks a little bit funky because you've got the tops and the bottoms of the squares sort of all evened out. And what you're going to do next is come over here and knit 1 square here. So let me get my yarn that I will need for that square. So the next square I'm going to be doing is this Opal Mini from the 2016 Opal Advent Calendar. And to start off with, I'm just going to cut my contrast yarn. Alright, then I'm going to begin knitting the square just like I would any other body square. So slip purlwise with the yarn in front, bring the yarn to the back, and then start with my square color, the actual yarn that I'm going to be using for the square. I'm going to knit down to the center stitch, so I will have slipped 1 and knit 22 for a total of 23 stitches worked on the right hand side. 22. Then I'm going to do my center double decrease. Again, if you're lost on this, please go back to my video on the body squares because I'm not going in depth into this. Then I'm going to knit 23, knitting the last one through the back loop. Alright, I have 1 more stitch to go, and you can see I have this marker here, so I'm just going to knit this one through the back loop. And what knitting it through the back loop does is just twist it a little bit, and I'm going to drop my marker. Now, this is why I recommend having 1 very long needle and 1 working needle, because at this point what I can do is turn around, drop that, and work with a separate needle so I don't have to be doing the same one. You could work with that needle if you wanted to, but I recommend having a separate one. From here on out, working the square is exactly the same as working any body square. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this square, and then when I'm done, I'll show you the process of picking up this next one, which will be a little bit different because we don't have a yarn tail here, but it won't be that different. Alright, I'll see you in a moment. So I've finished this square now, and my goodness is that a pretty yarn. So all I'm going to do is go to do the next one, and I'm going to follow the same method. I have my mini that's wound on my little sheep bobbin that is going to make a lot of noise. So I'm going to unwind a bit. Alright, take my new needle and just slip purlwise, and I don't have to worry about with the yarn in front because there's no yarn there. And then you just knit into the next stitch and go across just like you would on any other body square. And that's how you do it. The only other thing to talk about is when you come back and you want to pick up, say, between this square and this square that I'm about to make, when you do the center stitch that's going to be from square below, you're going to see those 2 black lines that I talked about. They're going to be right there. And what you're going to do is you're going to pick up the stitch that's right below them. So you can see there's this one that's kind of just the bind off stitch that's just below 1, and then there's the second one, and there's one poking out right there, and that's going to be what you will pick up to be the center stitch of your next row whenever you come to do that. I do have some footage of me doing that right here because I've already done the across section on the row below, and so you can see it in this square that I'll put in here. So when you are picking up a square in the row below this, I have already done this going across method, and when you go to pick up the center square, you can see what I mean. That yarn is this is the first time when it went across, it went over the top, and this is the second time going back, it went over the top. And so what you're going to do is pick up that first stitch that's right underneath the contrast yarn going across, and that's how you're going to get your center stitch when you are picking up from one of these rows. But that's it. That way you have fewer black ends to weave in, or whatever other contrast color you are using, and yeah, you can do more at once. Eventually I will probably get to the point where I'm doing the whole blanket across, so I'll be picking up for 21 or 22 squares at a time, which will be a little bit insane, and is why it's a good idea to have interchangeables, so that I can add cables and then remove the cables as I use them up. But for now, I'm just picking up 6. Next time it'll be 7. All right, that's all for now, and I will hopefully have, maybe in a month or two, a video about advanced techniques with the border. Please do not hold your breath for it. My life is insane right now, absolutely insane, and so I plan to do it, but I don't know that it will even happen in 2020. Hopefully sometime this summer. All right, I'll talk to you later.